we're going to start this month as we have included in the previous few months, and that is an ongoing COVID-19 archaeological sector response sort of coverage and analysis. And as the months have gone on, the urgency of some of these responses has or the requirement for these responses have lessened or been recontextualized, and therefore this month actually we're starting with, or rather, well, actually, in the order of things here, quite a nice story actually, and people are starting to reflect on their time during lockdown. For example, in particular, here we have a story coming out of Vindolanda Roman Fort up here on Hadrian's Wall, where the Sonia and Colin Galloway, who both work for the Vindolanda Archaeological Trust, who run Vindolanda Fort, left their home in Hexham to live on the fort, to look after it while it was in lockdown, because people would, want to climb onto the site and potentially vandalise it, or even see if anything has been not quite taken out of the ground yet. So they're looking after it, and it sounds like it's been a really lovely time for them, just existing amongst these Roman ruins in the museum. Um, I mean, if you had to be locked down on an archaeological site, Andy, could you think of one that you might want to live on for a bit?
Oh my goodness. Where do you start? I mean, it is a very nice story. I mean, uh, the subtext is quite serious. Obviously,
Yeah.
they talk about maintaining the correct conditions in the museum displays and so on, which have to many artifacts have to be in a stable environment, and otherwise they deteriorate, and
Hmm.
and so monitoring for humidity and things like that is really important. So yeah, there was a serious reason behind this, and also the what we know from previous watching briefs that there has been, for example, illegal metal detecting along Hadrian's Wall.
Yep.
So the chances of being hit by artifact thieves would have been quite high during the lockdown. In fact, there've been a number of. Just yesterday, there was an operation in the Greater Manchester area to arrest 4 people for illegal metal detecting on protected land in the north of Britain
Right.
and the Midlands.
Okay.
So the background to this is quite serious, but it is a lovely thought. I mean, and Vindolanda, I've been there several times, and it is a wonderful spot if you're going to be
I'm
marooned
I'm
anywhere in the
afraid
country.
I'm gonna have to do a Paxman. Answer my question, Mr. Brockman.
Oh, I, don't-
No,
I Trump, okay. I'm going to answer your question by not answering the question. Lockdown rules state non-essential travel
you're a slimy,
wasn't
slimy
allowed,
customer. You're wriggling out of
and
my question.
and I would want to visit and stay with and take my tent to so many that I'd have been arrested and banged up, so I wouldn't have been allowed to move.
Ah,
So I wouldn't have been able to stay. No, it's but no, you're right. It's a lovely story.
for me, it would be Conwy Castle, incidentally. Thank you for asking. So,
Bit drafty, and the guardrobes are
it
a
would be
bit
a wee bit,
sort
yeah,
of in
but
the
no,
middle of
but you see,
winter.
but they have a few rooms that have been reconstructed. I'd live in like the museum room, close the door. It's got
Uh,
heating. They've got toilets on site. I could order in some nice food from the local
oh,
butchers and stuff. It's great.
now
Make some
there's a
face.
thought, because Dover Castle has near where I grew up has a throne room now.
There you go. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So there you
Could
go,
live
Dover
like
Castle.
Henry II. That's great, actually. I could live like Henry II and then order the execution of the Archbishop of Canterbury. That'd be
Precisely.
fun.
Yeah, repurpose
Yeah,
the cannons.
yeah.
Set up your own little fiefdom.
Yeah.
So you think big, blue sky thinking. um, the
You're
next
right. Yeah.
the next story is the news that the coronavirus and Brexit, as an economic effect of Brexit, has hit the bid to save the London shipwreck. Now, just for people outside of London, because I actually fell foul of this is a ship called the London, as opposed to a shipwreck, the shipwreck in London, because apparently there's only one under that particular premise. So shipwreck called the London. Is this actually a project that you were aware of?
It is. It's a project I've been aware of for a long time, because it's been one of the major underwater archaeological projects around the coast of the UK
Hmm.
for the last few years. HMS London at our anchorage in March 1665. And in fact, it's recorded in the diary of Samuel Pepys.
Right.
Most of the crew and a number of visitors to the ship were killed. and the ship sank at a mooring. She was originally actually called HMS Naseby. It was built. She was one of the warships that was built by the government of Oliver Cromwell at the time when the Royal Navy was being reformed and literally rebuilt. And she was a major warship. The problem is the Nautical Archaeology Society and other groups who've been involved in an ongoing excavation of the site, because she's at risk as well from the development of the new Thames port and dredging activities to allow large ships up to the new Thames port at Tilbury. It requires money, and the conservation and ongoing excavation effort requires money. And anyone knows anything about underwater archaeology, it takes 3 times as long and costs 3 times as much in broad terms than archaeology on land. So there was a campaign in place to raise £200,000 a year to keep the project going. At the moment, a combination of effects principally this year, COVID. It appears that they've only managed to raise around £10,000, which obviously is not good. The thing about the London is she's all shipwrecks are a time capsule. She's a particularly interesting time capsule, and there are very good preservation conditions on the wreck site, which means organics are surviving very well. Things like shoes, wooden items, and so on. And because as the Miss Beatty Edwards says, that she's also the resting place of around 300 sailors and some of their relatives too. So it's a very significant monument. Watch this space. I think it's one of those sites that's going to be a marker as to how we actually cope with the fallout from Brexit and COVID and all the other things that are impacting on archaeology at the moment.
This is true, and in that vein, there's also the news that Creswell Crags, that we highlighted towards the beginning of the COVID lockdown, actually as being a site that was under threat due to essentially lack of visitors. There was no money coming into the site, therefore no money. Has announced that they have received a £250,000 grant, or boost, as they say in their press release, from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and this presumably is going to sounds like it's going to be just about enough to get them to reopening at some point. Hopefully this sort of money can be made available to projects like the London, but this is where I don't want to labour this point, but this is something that we have touched on in previous ones, where unfortunately there has to be, in all of these cases, an assessment made about the relationship between the asset, the funding required to keep it up, the cultural and social context of that thing, in terms of what does the local community require, and in terms of the local community's requirements, actually things like food, the ability to eat, medical care, so on and so forth. I think the full tally of how this has affected not only the broader economy, obviously, but also in particular the heritage sector is going to be, it's going to be one that, I mean, maybe we might be able to comment on in a year's time potentially, but even then we're going to be in an economic transition post Europe, aren't we?
I think that we're going to be looking at this in the same way that archaeologists and environmental archaeologists have come to look at the interruptions caused, for example, by that are observable in the archaeological record, and particularly things like the tree ring record of things like the Krakatoa eruption or the Santorini eruption. Volcanic eruptions. This is going to be a marker. This is going to leave scars in the landscape of archaeology and heritage and culture and society, actually, that is going to be visible from in perpetuity, actually, as part of our historical record, I think. I don't think that's overstating it. Basically, what's happened in the last 6 months is the entire economy, almost the entire economy of the developed world has come to a full stop.
Yeah.
And there have been effects observed, for example, the reduction in pollution clouds over certain industrial areas. In London, where I am now, that the pollution levels are lower than they would be normally.
Yeah.
Because that's just one thing. That's the kind of thing that finds its way into the ice core records in the Arctic and the Antarctic, assuming we've still got ice left at the end of the.
Yeah.
Don't want to get onto. And that's one of the points. This comes on top of things like the climate change emergency and other factors.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, and on that scale of discussion, £250,000 to keep Creswell Crags open is actually quite small beer.
Yeah.
Looking at it in the immediate, looking at the immediate future, it's fantastic that Creswell have got the grant. This is money from a fund run by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So it's money that is administered at arm's length on behalf of people who play the UK National Lottery.
Mm-hmm.
Other organisations have been into this. This is at the higher end of the grants that they've been given. I think 2 other organisations have had a similar size grant. Others have had much smaller grants, but then their requirements have been smaller. The big problem at the moment is just, and it's a problem that's happening it's a discussion that's happening in government, and we've been promised a statement next week by Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, about the financial future post-COVID or coming out of COVID. With the caveat that, as we speak, part of the UK has just been locked down again, Leicester, city of Leicester, and there are rumours and suggestions that other parts of the country may also be locked down again with people confined to home, all but essential travel banned and so on. This ain't over yet by a long way.
No. Well,
Um,
and as you say, so in that sense, it's difficult. It's going to be hard we can guess at where it's going, but it's going to be hard to have a final assessment of this stuff.
Absolutely,
Um, uh,
absolutely. And in fact, one of the biggest questions is what is going to happen to the culture sector, because the culture sector is
well,
contributes massively
yeah. Hmm.
to the UK economy. But at the moment, the furlough scheme, which enables museums to lay off staff, or at least tell staff not to come into work, but enable them to carry on living, is due to taper off and be finished entirely by November. But it is not clear whether all cultural organisations are even going to be able to reopen and generate fresh income by November, and even if they can, whether the income that they can generate with social distancing rules in place is even capable, will even cover their own costs.
Yeah.
So I think that the government has got some very tough calls to make about whether it needs to subsidise further sectors of the economy which in normal circumstances contribute massively, but in current circumstances can barely contribute at all.
You're right, and yet at the same time, looking at the time, I think we're okay just for a couple more minutes on this topic.
Sure.
At the same time, the sector is rhetorically undervalued, so it does contribute massively. But if you ask random people on the street, in particular in certain parts of the United Kingdom, they will not count. If you ask them what are the main contributors to the British economy, they won't think about heritage sector. It's
Yeah.
something which, for some people, if they're economically comfortable, it's nice to have. It's nice to be there, but they don't necessarily want to be taxed to pay for it. And in the lower down that economic ladder you go, the less likely you are to consider heritage and arts, for example, as a crucial part of the economy. So on the one hand, yes, I am almost certain that someone is making the case in government for the importance of these things. On the other hand, uh, it won't necessarily harm a lot of the base, shall we say, to see some of this stuff go under. It's one of those things where I'm not trying not to be politically cynical here,
No.
but it is nonetheless true, unfortunately.
That is true until they can't take their kids to the pantomime at Christmas because the local theatre's closed.
Precisely, yes. Or they can't get into,
Uh,
for example, Conwy Castle because because Cadw now is wrapped up, something like that.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, precisely. Um, Ending on a bit of a slightly higher note and a more technical note, though, for this section, there's the headline that "Back to the Grind: Historic Mills have been boosted." boosted by flour shortage during COVID-19 lockdown. This just to be clear, this is a shortage of the end product ground flour in terms of the production of that stuff, as opposed to access to grains in order to make flour. But yeah, local heritage mills have been grinding flour, and people have been able to get hold of it for the first time, in bulk for a while, which has been quite cool. And this is sort of tangential to archaeology, but nonetheless it is a crucial part of the heritage and archaeological sector, and that is the news that higher education reopening buildings and campuses guidance has been issued by the Department for Education. This was last updated on the 10th of June, however, and since the 10th of June, broader governmental advice has changed in terms of things like maximum, minimum distances, so on and so forth. Um, what I will say is, anecdotally, I've seen lecturers, uh, should we say, being piquant around around the notion that they're going to have to rewrite some of the things that they've been asked to try and put in place for the next academic year. It's yeah.
There's an even more fundamental question, and it has to be said: the Department for Education has not covered itself in glory during the
No.
COVID crisis. And Gavin Williamson, the Secretary of State, who was previously sacked for leaking government secrets
Hmm.
before he was brought back into the cabinet by Boris Johnson, has not exactly played a blinder, according to many independent observers. But there's an even more fundamental issue, which the Department of Ed has discovered with primary schools as well, in particular, because they were trying to get primary schools back first. And that is that you can make all the preparations you like and following all the government guidance absolutely to the letter in terms of preparing your buildings, but if people don't want to come, you're stuffed.
Hmm.
And the big question at the moment, particularly as far as higher and further and higher education is concerned, is when students have got discretionary spend, i.e., do I go to university this year under current conditions, or do I defer a year and hope that I can have a proper university experience involving Freshers Week, where I can actually get off with somebody,
Mm.
rather than have it socially distanced,
Hmm.
and all those other things that we do at university.
Hmm.
What will happen? We haven't got figures yet on this year's applications. There is a lot of concern that applications will be down. This is coming on top of the fall in foreign students because of COVID, but also because of Brexit. Where it is thought likely that there will be many fewer students from Europe coming to UK universities.
Hmm.
Uh, and there is a perfect storm brewing of really severe problems for the finances of Britain's higher education sector.
Yeah.
So watch this space. And the other one is not least, would you pay £9.5 to sit at home and watch a Zoom lecture on your laptop rather than be at university and be able to go to the pub afterwards?
Yeah, I think those are all legitimate questions, and I also understand why it is that some people go, "Oh, come off it, just get on with it."
Mm.
Um, I understand that side of it as well, but I think yes, an awful lot of people quite rightly want an experience in addition to their education. Plus, it's just different people have different modes of learning. I think it's arguably easier to learn in a room with other people than
Mm.
it is on your own looking at a screen. I have slightly
Mm.
less sympathy though for some students who I've seen complaining about, oh, it's really hard to watch a lecture for an hour, whereas they'll happily munch their way through a Netflix series in a day. So I don't think that's a legitimate argument. I understand that it's probably harder to concentrate, well, especially while looking at a laptop screen. But my point being that the technical act of getting information may not be actually all that much reduced by this. But I think there's more to university life, and also actually to what gaining information means in terms of learning, the social context of learning, than simply
Mm.
looking at a screen. So yes.
One of the problems, though, that the sector has is that there's a direct analogy for the cost of distance learning, which is the Open University, where an Open University degree
Mm.
costs about a third as much as a degree on a campus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think it's perfectly legitimate to raise that that question.
Hmm. Hmm.
And at the moment, the government and the vice chancellors are holding out for full fees. I'm not sure whether that's going to be sustainable.
No, no, indeed, indeed. And finally, there's a link here that we'll put below to the Heritage Alliance COVID-19 Guidance Hub, last updated on the 30th of June, in fact. So
They've been very
yesterday.
good actually about
Yeah,
keeping up to date on that stuff.
very up to date. And so, I mean,
Yeah,
we won't go all the way through that, but essentially, just
no.
the first little descriptor here. Heritage Alliance COVID-19 Guidance Hub is designed to provide up-to-date information related to coronavirus and its impact on the heritage sector. So, check that out below if you're interested. Definitely.
I'll just give you a very good
Yep.
example as why this stuff's important. One of the things it does is give advice, for example, and I know this because I'm on the board of a Grade 2 listed building which is open to the public, and we're considering this stuff at the moment because we're looking at reopening. And the one of the things it gives advice, for example, is signage when you've got listed interior features and you can't go nailing things onto walls.
No.
So it's really simple practical stuff like that. And if you've got any involvement in heritage in any way, it's a really important thing to have bookmarked.
Yeah. No, I
We're
think
great.
so.
Heritage Alliance have been very good about with their comms on this, and it's support their efforts. It's well worth it.
Brilliant. Okay.